Okay. All right, guys. Good to see you again. I don't remember the last time we had this session. I think it was a long time ago, but I'm pretty sure it's in this month. But like, when was the last time we have it? Okay, if I look at my record here. Oh, all right. We had a class on Friday, the 11th. Okay, so we had one class so far. Oh wait, no. Let's have a look here. December. 1, 2. Yep. Yeah. Okay, we had one class on 11th of April, so this should be our second session. Okay. So, let's have a quick look at what we did in our previous session. Right. Okay, in our previous session, I think we talked about how to properly and accurately interpret graphic information. That's the first thing we talk about. And then we talk about how to structure your report. Okay, so basically we were saying that we will break our report into 3 different sections: introduction, body, and conclusion. Okay, and then we talk about our time management. So in 20 minutes, we're going to spend the first 5 minutes planning, the next 10 minutes writing, and the last 5 minutes proofreading. Okay. Speaking about the exam criteria, all right, just to remind you guys, in case you don't remember, there are 4 criteria that you, let's just say there are 4 requirements, okay, that you have to satisfy. The first requirement is task achievement, or it's your ability to address all parts of the question. Okay, one of the most important thing in task achievement is presenting the overview of a graph. Okay, and throughout your report, it should be a summary of key features, not just description of what you see, not just interpretation of every single number. Okay, so you need to be able to compare one variables to another, so that you see how they differ from each other. Okay, right. Coherence cohesion, that's the next most important thing. That's all about how easy it is for someone to understand your report. So coherence cohesion depends on how you organize your data, or how you organize your information together, and how you link them using some transitional devices. Okay. So as long as they follow a logical order, you should be fine. So what is the logical order? You should start your report by having an overview. So overview will provide a general scope of your report. Okay, and everything that follows, which is elaborates upon your overview, which is built upon your overview. Okay. Lexical usage, that's about how you use your words to communicate your thoughts. All right. So they will be looking at your spelling, of course, your choice of words, whether the word that you have chosen can communicate the ideas accurately. And also they'll be looking at your natural use of words like things like collocation, for example. So collocation is a natural combination of words. So if you compare between phrases like, expenditure on versus expenditure to, okay, they both might make sense. Like I can say, I have a lot of expenditure. I have a lot of expense or expenditure on food, right? It makes sense. I can also say I have a lot of expenses to food. It makes sense, but the first one is more natural than the other because on is a preposition that collocates with expenditure or expense, not to. So you might want to take good care of use of preposition because they have their own collocations. And grammar, that's about how you select your structures. Okay, it's about how you select your structure. So in task 1, you'll be dealing a lot with describing things that happened in the past. So your past tense should be among your first choices for tenses, right? Because you're describing things in the past. Okay, and you also have to describe changes in the figures. So you might you have to be familiar with the use of passive voice. Okay, so sentence like a large increase can be seen. This is quite common and it's used passive. Okay, so you have to choose your structures wisely. Okay, bad choice for structures means it could distort your meaning. It can also cause you to have to write more words than necessary. Okay, and last but not least, accuracy also matter. I mean, your ability to follow the rules for every structure that you choose. Okay, if for example, if you're using past tense, then you have to remember that the rule for past tense is you need to use past form of verb. If you're using passive voice, you have to remember that verb be is the main verb or the finite verb. Okay, and it must be followed by past participle, not V1. Okay, right. Next, we talk about changes in figures. So we have we have verb and we have noun. All right, we can use either one to describe change, either intransitive or noun. Okay. But remember, if you're using intransitive verb, you can only write it in active forms, not in passive form. Okay. So that's it. We also talk about comparisons, but you have to use comparative adjective. Okay, you have to use comparative adjective to compare two quantities when one quantity is greater. Okay, just remember that there are two different types. You don't want to mix them up. Okay, that's type 1. That includes words like more, fewer, less. Okay, these comparative adjectives can only be put in front of a noun. All right, so And when you, it could be any nouns, right? So when you use this comparative adjective, make sure that they precede a noun. Whereas if you're using type 2 adjective, all right, there's restrictions for the use of type 2 adjective because you don't usually put them in front of common nouns. Why? Because it could change the meaning entirely. Like you can't say there are many cars, but you don't say there are high cars, for example, right? You can say there are only a few cars, but you don't say there are small cars, because if you say there are small cars, it's different from a few car, right? You can use a few to means number, but small doesn't mean number. Small means size here. We use it with car. All right, so this adjective usually follow linking verb, like verb be, for example. And the noun that they usually modify are numbers. Okay, so use these comparative, use this type 2 adjective with words like number, figure, percentage only, okay? Right. Next. Okay, superlative. I think we talked about superlative the last time as well, right? So superlative adjectives are used when you are making comparisons across 3 or more things, right? And when you use superlative adjective, you can also emphasize or highlight the quantity that's being the highest by using by far, okay? If you want to rank the number, you can rank the quantity, you can use word like second or third, okay? Future projection, okay, so future projection, we also talked about the last time. So it is about reporting somebody's prediction. So someone had made a prediction before you, right? And they use this graph to communicate what they forecast, right? So your job is not really making a prediction. Your job is to report the prediction that someone has made. So you have to be familiar with verb phrases like be likely to, be forecast to, be said to, be expected to, be predicted to. Okay, and these are all passive verbs. Okay, so the subject, the way to use this is that if you normally say something like the number increased, okay, you just have to pop one of these in between. So instead of saying the number increased, you would say the number was likely to increase, or the number was forecast to increase. All right, I hope this part is clear. Right, so that was all about chapter 1. I think we've done some work regarding that. Okay. So moving on to chapter 2. Let me just clear this up. สวัสดีครับเน่ฮัลโหลครับ เหมือนยังไม่มีคนเข้าแต่ผมก็สอนไปเรื่อยๆเนาะเพราะมันก็เรคคอร์ดอยู่ใช่ไหมครับใช่ค่ะโอเค ได้เลยครับ โอเคครับ สวัสดีครับ Okay, so for chapter two, that is about highlighting the main features in the chart. So let's have a look at this, for example. Okay, so we have a graph that tells us about sales of food in two different types of restaurants. We have fast food restaurants and sit-down restaurants. Okay, all right. So when you want to highlight key features, you might want to use these guidelines. Okay, so we have similarities, big differences, peak, highest point, lowest point, exceptions, and any other noticeable features. All right, so the first thing you might want to be looking at is similarities. So can you find any similarities in this two variables, fast food sales of fast food meals and sales of sit-down restaurants meals? Okay, if you look at it from a broad perspective, you would notice that the value at the end of the period, which is in 2000, for both businesses, right, are greater than the value that they had in 1970. Okay, so despite the shape of the line, right, it's clear that both restaurants, both types of restaurant did an okay business because the sales went up, right, from 1970 to 2000. That's a period of 30 years. So they did a decent job, right, for that period of time because they were not operating at loss. I mean, well, it's kind of not easy to say whether they been, making profits or not because this is just the number of meals that they sold. Okay, we haven't taken into account the operating costs and so many other costs. Okay, so maybe they could be operating at loss. But I mean, if you were operating at loss, why would you continue doing this for 30 years, right? And every 10 years you see, greater increase in the sales of your meal. So it could be assumed just by looking at the chart that they were doing a good business because the sales went up throughout the entire 30 years. Okay, so that's one thing we found, right? Both restaurants had an increase in the sales for 30 years. All right, now if we focus on some smaller segment of the chart, you will see that in 1970, right, both fast food and sit-down restaurant, they had a very humble beginning. They had the exact same sales figures in 1970, and that is 20 something, right? 20 meals. I'm not sure if how this is measured. Okay, with 20 units of sales. Doesn't matter how it is measured. All right. So those are the two major similarities. Okay. So one can be found in the characteristics of movement, and the other one is just the exact same number that both type of business have in common in 1970. Right. Now, what about big difference? So the big difference is something that they don't have in common, and it's quite obvious. So apart from both being upward trend, what are the differences between these two lines? Okay. Now, if you look at the year 2000, you will see a big difference because fast food restaurant made a very high sales figures. It is about almost 90 units of sales, whereas sit-down restaurant sales figures was very low. It was about 40 only. Okay, so fast food is about fast food sales were about 2 times as high as sit-down restaurant sales. Okay, so that's one thing to note. What else can you note? If you look at the rate of change, okay, for the rate of change, you will see that during the first 10 years, the two restaurants had very, sit-down restaurant seems to have a greater slope, which means it was increasing more rapidly than fast food restaurant. That's only between 1970 and 1980, right? But after 1980, you will notice that there's a drop. You will notice a drop in the rate of change for sit-down restaurant meals because the slope was not that great anymore. It's weaker now. Okay, but a different story can be seen in fast foods meals because in between 1970 and 1980, all right, it has like a very it has like a weak slope. Okay, but after 1980, the slope became much greater than before, which indicates that fast food restaurant sales were growing very rapidly between 1980 and 2000. So those are the two big differences. Now, moving on to peak. So what exactly is peak? So a peak is like a turn of an event, okay? So when a quantity, right, has been having a positive slope for a certain amount of time, okay, and then it decided to stop. It's like, I'm done here, okay? And so the slope becomes negative. So basically, a peak is the point where a function change is slope from positive to negative. Okay, so when it changes from positive to negative, you will have a peak or a summit or the highest point. So the left side, you will have a positive slope, and the right side of the peak, right, you will have a negative slope. It's something that looks like this. For the okay. So if you split this in half, this is a positive slope on the right side, on the left side. And on the right side, you have a negative slope. Okay, and this point right there is a peak. So in order to have a peak, you need to have upward trend and also downward trend. Otherwise, there's no peak. Okay. Next, the highest point. So the highest point, this doesn't have to be the same as the peak, right? It doesn't have to be the same as the peak because for peak, we talk about change in time. So we focus on only one variable. But for the highest point, we can focus on multiple variables, right? We can look at many different variables and then we decide, okay, which variables has the highest point or has the highest quantity in which time. Okay, because when time change, this behavior might change. Okay, so we need to fix the time, and then we look at all the variables that are present during that time and see the value that they have. Okay, so that's the highest point. Now, what about the lowest point? The lowest point is, just the opposite. So we look at a particular time, right? And then we compare all the variables to see which has the lowest value. That's it. Moving on to exceptions. So what is exception? Exception is the odd one out. Okay, so exception is something that a certain variables have that is not common for the rest of the other variables. Okay, so it is not easy to tell. In fact, it is impossible to tell if there are any exception for two variables. Okay, so to be able to identify an exception, we need at least 3 variables. Okay. Last one is any other noticeable features. So any other noticeable feature, this is up to you. Okay. So whatever you think is worth mentioning can go into this section of key features. So in this case here, we notice that during the first 10 years, sit-down restaurants was taking the lead. So they were having greater sales than the counterparts. But after 1980, it became the fast food restaurant that took the lead, right? Okay. And it seems also that after 1980, not only did fast food restaurant took the lead, but it's also increasing at a much greater rate than the sit-down restaurant. Okay, so that's something that you should remember to mention. Okay, so I hope you guys get a sense of how to identify overview and other main features. But for now, we need to fill in these gaps with some of the words in this rectangle down below. So feel free to take 5 minutes to fill the gap with these words in the rectangle. Be reminded that one word can only be used only one time. All right, so let's have a look at the first question. So it says here that, and blah, 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 in fast food restaurant and sit-down restaurant, sales can be seen, followed by a gap through, okay, the 3 decades. So what we have here is that I think this sentence, what it's trying to tell us is focusing on changing figures of both types of restaurant, right, during the 3 decades. So the first gap should be filled with increase, right? So, and increase in fast food restaurant and sit-down restaurant can be seen. And the second gap can be filled with a preposition for time period, like throughout. Next, in 1970, fast food restaurant made as many sales as sit-down restaurants. Next, the fast food and sit-down restaurant so exactly the same. Okay. So those are the two similarities. Okay. One is looking at the trend. The other is looking at specific coordinates in this Cartesian curve. Okay. So that specific coordinates is what the two functions have in common, right? So these two functions here, the fast food functions and sit-down functions, right? They seem to have the same y value when the x value is at 1970. Moving on to the big difference. So there was a what? There was a something in the number of fast food meals. So between fast food and sit-down restaurant. So big difference, we are looking at the year 2000. So in 2000, that was a big difference. So the word is huge discrepancy. All right, that's a huge discrepancy in the number of meals sold between fast food and sit-down restaurant. But after 1980, fast food restaurant experience what? Experience a significant growth. Okay, experience a significant growth. While the counterpart sales climb at a sluggish rate. Next, the highest point. So the two restaurants made the highest sales of meals, right? It's made the highest. The highest sales of meals in 2000. Next, the lowest point. So year 90 saw what? Year 90 saw the lowest. Okay. Saw the lowest sales of meals in both fast food and sit-down restaurants. As for the exceptions, there's no exception. As for any other noticeable figure, it says was not until 1980 that the figure for fast food restaurant began to rise. What? Began to rise at a rapid rate. Overtaking that for the other restaurant in mid-1980s. All right, that's it. Now, moving on to the next exercise. So what we have here is a bar chart that compares the number of hours that two different types of people spend on housework. Okay, so I want you to take some time to answer these three questions. Okay, but first I encourage you to interpret any of this bar. Okay, so try to write a sentence to describe maybe the first bar, the white one. Okay, if you can explain what happened here, then it will be easier for you to make comparisons. Okay, so how about I'll give you guys 3 minutes, okay, to think about, to try to like understand everything, okay, and answer the first question, right? What do you think could be an overview? So 3 minutes? Okay. All right. So, what do you think should be a good overview for this particular chart here? Okay, so if you look at just the white bars, then we will notice that the height, right, of the white bar increases, okay, with respect to what? The number of children, okay? Because when they had no children, okay, the number of hours is only 30. But with 1 or 2 children, the number of hours is just jumped to 50. Okay. Now with 3 more children in the family, the number of hours jumps a little bit to about 50. Okay. So we can sort of see a correlation, right? A correlation between the number of hours for women and the number of children that they have to look after. And what kind of correlation do they have? They have a positive correlation. All right, what does positive correlation means? When X increase, Y increase. That's a positive correlation. Okay, so we notice a positive correlation between women's hours numbers and the number of the children. What about men? What kind of correlation can you notice here? Can you observe here? So the correlation is that there might not be any correlation between the number of hours that men spend on housework and the number of children that they have, right? There may not be any correlation. Or there could be what we call a negative correlation, because we can notice a small drop in the hours for housework. All right. So depending on how sharp your vision is, okay, depending on how sharp your vision is, there may be no correlation or just negative correlation. Right. So based on what we have observed, what we can say here is maybe if you just focus on women first, right? If we focus on women first, then we see that their hours went up, right? Okay. Women's hours increase. Okay. In fact, let me just use shorthand notation here. Women hours increase. What about men? Men hours that decrease. But what about the independent variables? That's number of children. And the number of children increase. All right, so these two are the dependent variable, whereas this is an independent variables. All right. So we can begin our sentence by noticing that the independent variables increase. So we can say, as the number of children increases, or we can use like a more a less formal style. We can say as. Maybe I'll just stick to that style because it's like easy to understand. As the number of children increases. Now, two different types of people are going to do different things. If you talk about women's hours first, as the number of children increases, what do? Women, their hours increase, right? Which means they spend less or more hours on housework. They spend more hours on housework. Women spend more hours on housework. But this is the men have the opposite trend. Okay, so from men, spend more hours on housework, whereas men spend less hours. Okay, women spend more hours, but men spend less hours. What can be said about the first two bars? first two bars. It is obvious that married women spend more time than married men, right? But the difference is not that significant. So we can just say there was a slight difference. Right, there was a slight difference in the amount of time men and women spend on housework. All right, without children, but we can use a different wording when they have no children. Okay, so there was a slight difference in the amount of time men and women spend on housework when they have no children. Next, what can be said about the first two white bars? Okay, so we talk about the first two white bars here. What do you think? Now you notice that just with a small increase in the numbers, okay, there is a huge difference between the number of hours. Right. So what we can say here is that when women start having children, right? When women start having children, their hours on housework, right? When women start having children, their hours on housework jump from 30 to 50 hours per week. Okay, so this exercise is just intended to help you to practice how you identify the overview and also some main features in the chart, okay? So I think we should do some more of this exercise, okay? All right, so but for now, let's just take a quick break of 10 minutes and then we come back to do more of exercise like this. All right, I'll see you in 10 minutes.
Okay. So let's just do more exercise like this one. All right. So we have US energy consumption by fuel. All right. Okay, so let us try to understand maybe this point, this coordinate. Okay, so what does that mean? Okay, so before we can go on and highlight the key feature, we need to have basic understanding of what each coordinates means, right? So this coordinates, right, is the coordinates being 35 quadrillion versus 1980. So 35 quadrillion, comma, 1980. So how can we explain this? So what happened here? So one thing we can say is that if we look at the top part of the chart, we will see US energy consumption. So we're talking about the country, US, right? And what does it do? It consume energy. Okay, but the energy that it consumes has to come from some fuel. And there are many different fuel sources below the chart. So petrol and oil is one of the fuel, okay, from which their energy is consumed. So I can say here that in 1980, the US consumed 35 quadrillion units of energy. In 1980, the US consumed 35 quadrillion units of energy. And It may not be stated here, but it is known that we are talking about electrical energy here, right? Because how did I know? Solar and wind. I mean, you cannot convert solar and wind to any other form of energy other than electrical energy. So that's how I know that they are talking about electrical energy. So in 1980, the US consumed 35 quadrant units of electrical energy. Okay, but what makes this coordinate different from this coordinate, all right, is that the source of fuel that they use is different. They consume the same electrical energy, but from different fuel source or from different origin. Okay, so I can say that the US consumed 35% of electrical energy from petrol and oil. Okay, so once I'm clear with that, then I can move on to find some key features. So if I look at the trend, okay, if I look at the trend, I can notice that this blue line, the red line, and the yellow line, they have a very clear uptrend. So I'm going to draw like a long arrow here just to indicate that they have a very clear uptrend. But if you look at nuclear, well, the uptrend seems to be only for this period. But other than that, it just stopped going up, okay? So from here onward, we only have plateau or stability, no change, okay? Right, the same is also true for coal, okay? So coal, nuclear, they have increase in the use. I mean, they have increase in energies produced from this source from 1980 to 2005. But after that, the amount of energy coming from nuclear remain stable. Okay. Now, if you look at the blue line, says hydropower. So hydropower, it seems to just fluctuate, right? Hydropower it seems to fluctuate throughout the entire period. Okay, unlike every other fuel source, it's just fluctuate, going up and down, going up and down throughout the entire period. Okay, so based on this, right, I can say that for my overview, petrol, natural gas, and coal they had what? Had an increase in, I probably would say, natural gas. Okay, petrol, natural gas, and coal. Were the fuel sources used, I would say for With a fuel source. Let me just do it again. Sorry, guys. So I would say the electrical energy consumption from petrol, natural gas, and coal increase throughout the entire period. Okay, the electrical energy consumption from petrol increases the entire period, whereas the consumption from nuclear and solar plus wind only rose for a short period. Hydropower, on the other hand, was the least popular source with very low energy production. Okay, so that's my overview. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you guys some opportunity to try and highlight what I believe should be a good key features. So first, I'd like you to have a go with this. Okay, I want you to look at. Okay, I want you to look at petrol, oil, and natural gas and coal. Okay, and tell me what they have in common. Okay, petrol, oil, natural gas, and coal. What do they have in common? So you can see that these are non-renewable. What does non-renewables means? It means these sources These fuel sources, once you use them to produce electricity, the amount of reserve that we have for them will start to decline. So the more we take from the earth, right? For example, oil, right? Oil has been building up for millions of thousands of years, right? It's just this sediment is formed by the remnants of the living organisms, right? Okay. So oil is natural resources and it can be depleted. Okay, if you use too much oil, it will soon it can be depleted. The same is true for natural gas, right? It can also be depleted. Coal also, right? We have to dig down in our earth to mine coal, and coal just come from the accumulation of dead plants and dead animals for for thousands of years, for a million of years. Right. So these are non-renewable. What about nuclear, solar, wind, and hydropower? These are, well, nuclear is actually non-renewable as well. So if I were to break down like this, it might not make sense. Let's just say the first three are carbon-based. Okay, carbon-based, so it's not a clean energy, right? So it's carbon-based. Okay, so it's not clean. Whereas the other one, they are clean energy because there's no combustion necessary to convert nuclear or solar or hydro to energy. There's no burning required. Unlike the first three sources, we have to burn them to extract energy from them and then use that energy to heat up the water. And when we use the vapor, we increase the pressure of the vapor. Okay, so it flows at a very, very high rate. Okay, and we use that steam to drive the turbine to generate electricity. All right. So I have broken this down for you. So if you look at the first group, carbon-based or not clean energy, will you be able to make a comparison across all these three? Okay, all these three. Okay, just make a comparison across all these three. So we need to use superlative adjective here. All right, I'll give you 3 minutes to do this, and then I'll give you some model answer. Right. So do you figure it out? Okay, so we just have to rank them, right? So first we could say that petrol and oil, right? That's number one in terms of energy consumption. That's number one, that's number two, and that's number three. So we can say that petrol and oil okay. I could say most of the electrical energy consumption came from petrol and oil. In 19 let's say in 1980 came from petrol and oil, right? Followed by natural gas and coal, right? So most of the electrical energy consumption in 1980 came from petrol and oil, followed by natural gas and oil. Right. Now let's talk about change in the figures, okay, for energy consumption from petrol and oil. Okay, so we're going to be looking at this curve from here to here, okay? All right, let's give you guys another 3 minutes. Try to include as many details as you can. All right. So what we see here is petrol and oil, right? It has a positive slope, okay, from 1980 to 2030. But 2030, that is in the future. So we need to use the phrases that we learned in chapter 1. Okay, but before we do that, right, let's just describe it normally as if it already happened in the past. Okay, so if I assume that everything had already happened in the past, then I can say the electrical energy consumption, the electrical energy consumption went up rapidly in let's add some figures. Let's up rapidly by, okay, let's use percentage terms here. So it starts at 35 and it ends at around, let's say, almost 50. So 50 divided by 35, that is 1.43. If you multiply that by 100 and subtract 100 from it, then we can see a 42.9, okay, 42.9% increase, right? So I can say that the went up rapidly by 42.9%. Right, electrical energy consumption went up rapidly by 42.9%. In 2030. Now, we can sort of now, instead of using went up rapidly, we can use a passive voice. The electrical energy consumption was predicted. Okay, so we're going to pop this in before our main verb here. So the main verb is actually was predicted. The electrical energy consumption was predicted to. Okay, now we have to change this into a non-finite verb, make it infinitive. So we already put a to here. So next we have to change that to go. Was predicted to go up rapidly. Electrical energy consumption was predicted to go up rapidly by 42.9% in 2030. Okay, now, okay. Now let's have a look at the green line. Okay, so the green line will represent nuclear. Okay, so what I would like you to do is I would like you to talk about what happened in 1980 for nuclear only. Okay, so you want to first talk about what happened in 1980, and then you talk about the change, okay, that took place between 1980 and 2005. So that's the second thing. All right. And again, the third thing is the change that took place from 2005 to 2030. But there's actually no change, right? So you just have to talk about how the energy consumption from nuclear just remain relatively stable. All right, so there's going to be 3 sentences that you have to write. Well, let's see how you would join them together. All right, I'll give you 3 minutes. Okay, now let's see. So I'm just going to get rid of some of these answers that I have written so far so that I will have more space to show you how this is done. Okay, so if you look at what happened at the beginning here, right, we can see that in 1980, it was less than 5 quadrillion units, right? So we'll say less than 5 quadrillion. Less than 5 quadrillion units of electrical energy consumption in the US came from nuclear. Okay, so very little, right? Less than 5 quadrillion came from nuclear. But in the next 20 years, it sort of went up. However, over the next 15 years, right? No, over the next 25 years, over the next 25 years, what happened? The consumption rose or went up, right? The consumption went up. I just want to make this a little more clear. The electrical energy consumption for nuclear went up. But it's not so quick, right? It went up gradually. In 2005. And after that, it just remained stable, right? I'll just say before stabilizing. You can also say before reaching a plateau, just say before stabilizing. But at the end, it's in the future. So I would say before a forecast. Okay. I guess after that, forecast stability. Stability would last until the year 2030. Okay, so in 1980, less than 5 current units of electrical energy consumption in the US came from nuclear. However, over the next 25 years, the electrical energy consumption from nuclear went up gradually in 2005. After that, a forecastability I would say, I just don't want to use the words redundantly. After that, I would say a stability. All right, a stability. Right, and it was expected. Right, the stability was expected to last until 2030. A stability was expected to last until 2030. All right, that is it. Okay, guys, let's just take another 10 minutes break, and then we will come back to continue with our lessons. Okay. All right, so next we are looking at techniques for paraphrasing. So first of all, what is paraphrasing? So basically paraphrasing is all about writing the same things in different ways. Okay, so the meaning must remain intact. The meaning cannot change. Well, the only thing that change is your phrases and your word and structures. Okay. Now, there may be many different methods to paraphrase. Okay, some of you might be familiar with the use of synonyms. Okay, some of you might be familiar with changing some word structure, like word forms. Okay, now let me just give you some of the lowdown for the advantages and disadvantages of some of the methods that are popular. Okay, so suppose we are given this sentence. Okay, the lie graph gives the average length of life for men and women in the UK from 1901 to 2025. Okay, so we're given this sentence. Okay, now some people would paraphrase by changing, replacing some of the words with their known synonyms. For example, if you look at the word graph, gift, okay, some of you might want to replace that with provide or show, which is okay. All right, but the risk associated with using a synonym is the collocation and word form. Okay, because just because words have the same meaning, it doesn't mean they have the same part of speech or the same collocation. So those are the things that you have to look out for. Okay, just because they have the same meanings, this doesn't mean they have the same collocation. Okay, so you can do that, but at your own risk. Okay, now what I would recommend, the technique that I would recommend you guys to do would be this method number 4. So what is method number 4? So when you're given this sentence, right, what you want to do is to try to identify the main verb, which is going to be that one, and then turn that into a passive voice. Okay, so you turn that into a passive voice, that verb become a passive version. Okay, so the verb takes the past participle form. So from give becomes given, and given will be preceded by a linking verb, is. Okay, so we can now say information about the average life expectancy for British male and female citizen is given. Okay, so that's the main change now. Now you would notice that when you turn this into passive voice, in fact, it's supposed to be this object that takes the subject position. However, it turns out to be this word, information. Okay, so where does that word come from? Well, we use this word as a subject so that we don't have to worry so much about changing the verb form, okay, to match the subject, because in case the subject is plural, then we need to change singular verb here to plural verb. Okay, so we don't want to bother with that. So we're going to use information as our fixed subject, okay? And everything that used to be the object of the word give will simply become the complement. All right, so from here to here, that is the complement. All right, so information about blah, blah, blah is given in the lie graph, covering the period from 1901 to 2000. Okay, we good? So, so one thing that is worth noticing is that the part that is about the time, okay? This part about the time, it has been removed, right? It has been removed from the object, okay? So we're not going to say information about the average life expectancy for British male citizens from 1901 to 2025. We're not going to say that. Instead, we're going to bring that to the end of the sentence, okay? Because we don't want our subjects to be too long. All right, that's it. Now, let's do some practice, okay? Let's try that with our previous example. Okay, so we are given this lie graph, and it's about US energy consumption by different fuel sources. Okay, so to apply that techniques, we just begin our sentence with information. Okay, information about US energy consumption. All right, information about the US energy consumption by US energy consumption by different fuel sources is given. In the lie graph. Covering the period from 1980 to 2030. All right, so that's how you do it. Information about the US energy consumption by different fuel sources given in the lie graph, covering the period from 1980 to 2020. See, simple. Okay, let's move on to chapter 3. So, for chapter 3, we're going to be looking at how to organize our information. Okay, now, there are different ways to organize information, but what I recommend is that you use either trend, category, or time. Okay, so we have trend, or we use category, or we use time. Okay, all right, so how does that work? Now, if we let's try to look at okay, let's try to look at this table. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the trend first. Okay, so we have different methods. We can use trend. Okay, we can use trend. We can use time. We can use category. Okay, so if we look at the first item here, we see that the rate of consumption, I mean the what do you call it, the percentage of ownership, it has a positive slope. So it went from 39 to 64. So that is positive. Okay, again, television, it also has a positive slope, although it wasn't changing as fast as central heating, it has a positive slope. But video, it doesn't have any slope. All right, it's in fact, we don't know the trend yet. Okay, so we're gonna put a star here, okay, because it's the odd one out. Now for vacuum cleaner, that's again a positive slope. Refrigerator is also refrigerator is a positive slope. Washing machine, has a positive slope. Dishwasher has a positive slope, and telephone has a positive slope. Okay, so if we're using trend, we're not going to have a balanced paragraph because we only have one item that doesn't have a clear trend, whereas the rest has an uptrend. So maybe trend is not a very good idea, okay? But we also have subcategory. All right, like IA, okay? We have subcategory, and that is to use the, if you look at the rate of change, if you look at the rate of change, then we sort of notice that central heating, what else? And telephone and refrigerator. Okay, we can say that these items have high rate of change. So that means the number increases more rapidly. Okay, so we have that. Okay. Okay, but when we compare those with television, we sort of have a low rate of increase. Okay, vacuum cleaner, how much is that? That's only 8, right? So low rate of increase. What about this? This is about 14. So this is like average. But we probably put that on a low rate of increase. And dishwasher, it is clear, low rate of increase. Okay. So if we look at the rate of increase, we can divide it into high and low. High rate of increase and low rate of increase. Okay, now if you look at the time can also have subcategories. So what we can do here, like 22A, so we can have the beginning. Versus the rest. Right? The beginning versus the rest. Or we can have 2/2. All right, so let's have a look at the first strategy, the beginning versus the rest. So what you can do here is you can look at the year 1972, and then we're going to compare all these values to see what is the biggest. Okay, so it is obvious that the biggest value would be for television. Okay, and then the next biggest value would be for vacuum cleaner. Right, and then the third largest value would be for refrigerator. Okay, so we'll at the beginning of the period, which is in 1972, or this column only, we will make comparisons across all these variables. All right, so your first paragraph will not cover anything other than comparisons across all these values. But then for this following section, you're going to describe change, okay, that took place from 1974 to the end. Okay, so for example, if you look at television, so what has been said about television in the previous paragraph would be some things like television had the highest percentage of owners. Okay, so that's the kind of sentence that you would write in the first paragraph, but for this next paragraph, you'll be looking at changes in the figures. So you're going to switch to a different structures and different vocabulary set. So you will say the percentage of television owners went up. All right, it went up from 93 to 98. Okay, and that's over the period of 11 years. Okay, and the difference is 5. So it went up by 5% from 93 to 98. Okay, so you do similar things for other items as well. Okay, so like for example, if you look at telephone, so in the first paragraph, right at the beginning, you would say some things like, in 1972, less than half of the British population owned telephone. But in the next 11 years, the percentage of owners rose dramatically, right, by 35% to reach 77% in 1983. Okay. Right. Now, let's look at 2.5. So for 2.5, what we do is we're going to divide this into, we're going to divide the period by 2. So it's 11 years, all right. But we're gonna split to, okay, let's count the number of columns here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So if we divide by 4, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we split right here. Okay. Then we're going to try to talk about what happened during the first 6 years. So this is during the first 6 years. Okay. And then what happened during the last 4 years. The last 4 years. The last, in fact, 5 years. Okay, because like when you say central heating went up from 39 to 52, but then you have to say from 1978 at 52 to 1983. So that's 5 years. All right, so that's the first 6 years, and then the last 5 years. So the first 6 years, you can talk about so many things here. All right, so like for example, we can sort of do the ranking. So we can say which items has the greatest number of owners. Okay, we can rank them. So TV, vacuum cleaner, and refrigerator, they're going to come up top. All right, and then we can say that telephone and central heating, they were not that popular. But we can also talk about video and dishwasher, that they did not exist. Like video, for example, it didn't exist in this period at all, whereas dishwasher just emerged in 1978. So those are the things we can talk about. We can also talk about the change in the figures. Now it is quite obvious that central heating is underwent what? About 13%, right? Television 3%, vacuum cleaner 5%, refrigerator is about 18%. Okay. Washing machine, that's about 9%. Telephone, that's about 18%. So it's quite obvious it's telephone and washing machine. No. Telephone and I think refrigerator, right? They have the same rate of increase. It's a difference by 18, correct? Right. Okay, and then for the second half, or for the last 5 years, we can make a backward reference to what we have said before. So in the previous paragraph, right, we mentioned that television was the most popular device. It has the highest percentage of owners. Okay, and in the last 5 years, it still remained at the top. So it never got overtaken by any other appliances. What about vacuum cleaner? Vacuum cleaner used to be at the top, right? But it seems to have a runner-up. Refrigerator, right? Okay. Now, vacuum cleaner maintained its status until 1982. So it was the second most popular until 1982. But after 1982, we don't see any record. So it could be due to the fact that people stopped using it, or there's just no record for it. Okay. But so it obvious that in 1983, the second most popular appliance was not vacuum cleaner anymore. It was refrigerator. And that's something you can mention. Okay, what else can you mention in this second paragraph? We can look at video and say that, oh, look at that, 1983. It was the first time people start using it, right? We don't know for a fact whether people actually started to use video in 1983 or the records just have never been there from the beginning. All right, we don't know. So we just have to, make up our decision whether to pass it off as records missing, or we can pass it off as video came into existence in 1983. All right, we can also talk about dishwasher, right? In the previous section, we didn't get to talk much about dishwasher because the numbers just show up out of the blue in 1978. But from 1978 to 1983, okay, it has been known that dishwasher had come into existence, and the percentage of the user just went up. All right, although at a very gradual pace. We can still see an upward movement here. Okay, so that's something we can talk about as well. All right, so that's 2/2. Next is category. Okay, category. And like the other two strategy, all right, we can have two subdivision here. So 3A, for example, is predefined. Okay, and B is user defined. So what is predefined category? So predefined category is a category that is that has already been done for you. Whereas user defined is a category that you do it yourself. All right, no work has been done for you. So in this case here, there are 8 items, okay? And it doesn't look like any work to break this down into category has been done for you. So you will have to do it yourself. Okay, so you will have to think about how you would group them together. Right, how would you group them together? Now, one way to do it is to sort of group them together based on how they're used, like central heating, vacuum cleaner, refrigerator, washing machine, and dishwasher. These might be considered electrical appliances that relieve your labor. So they do things for you, like more efficiently than you do. Okay? And they tend to be what we call a durable appliances, a permanently connected unit. Now, television, video, and telephone, these are not rugged. These are not durable appliances. Okay, so these appliances can be considered for entertainment purposes. So the other are for to relieve your labor, but television, telephone, and video, these are just for entertainment. So that's one way to do it. We could break it down in terms of entertainment and non-entertainment. How about that? Okay. All right, so let's have a look at this model answers. So these charts show student expenditure over a 3-year period in the United Kingdom. Write a report for a university lecture describing the information shown below. You should write at least 150 words. Okay. All right, so first of all, let's try to understand what each of the bar means here. So this bar right here, it tells you the percentage of, how much does this thing account for the expense of the student in, what year was it? 1996. Okay. So assuming that they spent $100, all right, they spent $100 in year 1996. About 22 or $23 was spent on accommodation. So that's what it means. Okay, so if they spent $100 on accommodation, if they spent $100 in year 1996, about 22 went to accommodation. All right, so that's what it means. Now, I'm going to give you maybe 3 minutes to try to fill in the gaps with all these words. Okay, so first, maybe you read this report just to get a sense of what it's trying to tell you, and then try to fill the gap. I will give you 3 minutes, and then I'll come back with some answers. Okay, so for number 2, number 2 would be the period, right? 3 years period, so we could use throughout to talk about period. Okay, so we're going to write throughout. Next, students spend 3% less on accommodation, which fell 23%, 20%. Let's look at accommodation. So this is about 24. Right, according to them, it's about 24. This is 23%. Okay, so we can say which fell from 23%. Oh, wait. Oh, I'm sorry. I look at the wrong ones. Sorry. This is 23. And this is 20%. Okay, so it fell from 23% to 20%. And there was a 2% decrease. Next, they move on to spending on food and household goods, which is this one right here. Okay, so what happened is that it decreased by 2%. Okay, so it assumed that it used to be at 20% in 1996, and it drops to what, 18%. So that's a 2% difference. So there was a 2% decrease in. The word to use here is in. Okay. In spending on food, bills, and household goods, which fell from 20% to 18%. At the same time, course expenditure went down. Let's look at course expenditure. It is a course expenditure. And they believe that it used to be at 10%. And then it dropped to 7%. So it went down by 3%. Children who constitute 1% off. 1% of student expenditure are not represented in 1999. On the other hand, there was a 5% growth. What? In, right? That's a 5% growth in spending on entertainment, which stood at 26% of total expenditure in 1996. But rose to what? But rose to 31%, right? So that's a preposition too. Spending on other non-essential items and credit repayment grew by 4%, right? Grew by 4% to make what? To make up 16% of the total expenditure. All right, and last but not least, spending on essential travel went up by 3%, okay? While non-essential travel underwent a 1% fall. Last paragraph, overall, with the exception of expenditure on essential travel, the most significant general change was a shift. What is it? A shift from spending on essential item to spending on non-essential item. So it is obvious that there are 4 paragraphs here in this report. And the first paragraph is simply used to show where the information came from. It does not really give you the overview, right? So this is unlike what we discussed earlier in chapter 1, where we said we should include overview in this introduction. So let me ask you where the overview is in this report. The overview is in the last paragraph. That's the overview. So you can actually write overview in the final paragraph like this, okay? You just need to provide them with some signpost language that this is the overview. But which is better between putting an overview at the end of your report or put it at the beginning of your report? Which do you think is better? Now, it's going to depend on how fast you think you can write and how well you think you can manage the time. Okay, if you can manage your time well, say if you give yourself enough time to write 150 words, okay, in exactly 20 minutes or maybe less than 20 minutes, because 20 minutes is what you have to do task 1. But you don't spend 20 minutes writing, you need to spend like 5 minutes planning. So you are left with about 15. So if you believe that you can write not more than 15 minutes, that's okay. But if you're not certain about your time management skill or your writing speed, then it better begins your report so that you don't miss any point for task achievement. Okay. So yeah. Now overview is going to serve also as the main idea. So it should be at the beginning, because the rest of the paragraph will be based upon the overview. So the overview tells you that there are 2 different kinds of expenditure, right? One is the essential, the other is non-essential. And the behavior that they exhibit is that the non-essential expenditure, they all seems to go up, right? Whereas the essential expenditure, they seems to go down. But of course, there are some exceptions, like it's mentioned here that with the exception of expenditure on essential travel, the most significant change was a shift. So that means essential travel was the only essential expenditure that actually go what is it? Expenditure on essential. Okay, where is essential? Let's see. Okay, it says here, spending on essential travel went up. Okay, spending on essential travel went up, or non-essential underwent a 1% fall. So essential travel is the only spending that actually is essential spending that actually went up, because the majority of essential expenses, they went down. Okay. All right. So paragraph B and C, they, even though they don't have a clear topic sentence, it can almost be guessed from all the words and sentences here. That, for example, paragraph B is all about expenditures that had an had a downtrend, whereas paragraph C is about expenditure that had an uptrend. Okay, right. Now, the way the techniques to represent key features is that they would use words like less, which is a comparative adjective, or sometimes they use a noun to mean a movement noun along with percentage terms, like that. Okay. Again, went down by 3%, 5% growth, grew by 4%, went up by 3%. Okay, so it's clear that they use this, right? They use this to show what? To show the main features. Okay, and then they support it by using the initial and final value, right? They support it using the initial and final value. Right. So the technique they use to highlight key feature is not so fancy, right? They use differences, and then they support it by talking about the initial value and final value. Like, they're going to start by saying, hey, this expense is going to drop by 3%, and then they're going to tell you from what value to what value. Okay, that's the only technique that they use. Okay, so it's no-brainer, but it's quite an effective strategy because it allows you to write quickly because you don't have to think too much. Okay, but a downside of this is you have to think about what you can do to vary the structures and the use of vocabulary so that you don't repeat the same words over and over. Okay, so that's the downside. So for task achievement, okay, so how do we rate task achievement? Okay, so a minimum requirement for 6.0 is that you have to write at least 150 words. So I believe if you do the counting, you will get 150. Next, there's supposed to be an overview, and the key features must be identified. So yeah, key features have been identified, although the strategy is not too good. In fact, you could, I mean, these are all the largest quantity, but it has never been mentioned. So I would say this is about greater than or equal to 6.0. Now for coherence and cohesion, we have to look at how well it flows, okay? Is there any hindrance? Is there any sentence, any point where you need to pause to think what he's saying here? No, right? So this is about greater than or equal to 6. Now, what could be done to improve this part is that there could be a better topic sentence for paragraph B and paragraph C. And there could be, I mean, of course, there should be more linking devices, but in order to have a greater variety of linking devices, the sentence relationship have to be more complex than this. Now, lexical range and accuracy. As for lexical range and accuracy, I am quite impressed because there have been a variety of words. Okay, the writer never repeat using the same words more than one time. So this is definitely greater than 6.0. As for grammatical range and accuracy, there's only a few errors that could be spotted here, and they are not major. Now, an example of one error that I've spotted is the use of present tense here. This should be past tense because it is in the past. So this should be about above 6.0. All right, so that's the end for today's session. I hope you enjoy, and I'll see you guys next time.